Right. Can you believe it? Another edition of Nostr Talks right here. And we've got Max and Dhruv today. This is new because usually, like in the past, a lot of our Nostr Talks are me and Max, like recently been walking around the Presidio doing these like walking Nostr Talks. And today we actually, yeah, I've seen them, great. So today we actually have Dhruv able to join us, which is cool. You know, every once in a while we get a builder together to discuss, but usually we're getting somebody who's very Nostr pilled already, who kind of already gets it and is building something in the Nostr ecosystem. And one of the things that we thought would be interesting about your project, Dhruv, is that Create touches on all these themes that we talk about on Nostr Talks, like every time we do one of these things, but you're doing it from a very kind of Nostr agnostic perspective. And so we'd like to sort of separate it out into, let's talk about like what Create is and what inspired you to build this and where it's going. And then let's sort of turn the tables in the later half and we'll talk about, we will share with you our enthusiasm about Nostr, where we think Nostr is going, and then we can kind of collectively try to figure out which of these ideas merge and overlap and where there's sort of, interesting inspiration between the two. Sound good?
Totally. Sounds awesome.
Sounds great.
Excited to be here, guys.
Great. Well, welcome.
Thanks for coming, Dhruv.
I'm glad you could join us. Yeah. So yeah, I guess like to start, why don't we just get a little bit of a sense, like where did Create come from? Were you hacking on other related projects or doing something else? And then kind of how were you inspired to create?
Yeah, so my co-founder and I started Create a couple of years ago, and it was kind of born out of our own frustration with starting our own projects and realizing we kept making the same building blocks again and again. And so in 2021, we looked at the available technology and decided, what if there was like code generation? What if you could just, stitch together whatever you needed? And at the time, we had actually built an entire code generation system, and that was the first version of Create. We also scaled a developer marketplace and had a lot of kind of grew it to a certain size. And then, LLMs started to happen, and we were increasingly adding more and more LLMs to our product. And so the current version of Create, which is a LLM powered app builder, kind of came out of a pivot. We had this cool developer marketplace and we wanted to show people what it is they could make with it. And so we put like an LLM powered code generation tool on our homepage, and people just kind of like fell in love with it and started using it, started generating all sorts of interesting things. And we just found it was a much, much faster way to go from like idea to piece of software. And so we've been kind of chasing that thread for now like the last year. It's starting to grow. I still think our mission is we just think that like it was very clear to us early on when LLM first kind of came out how they would be useful for code generation and how that would change who and how and why software will be made. And so we'd already seen that with the first instantiation of Create. We had all these non-technical builders using us to build full projects. And now we see that, to a much, much greater scale, where people are able to basically spin up any type of software project they want with just a few lines of natural language.
And what are the types of things that, like, I could imagine, I mean, some projects are, 6 months to work on with humans and could take, a million lines of code or something. But like, what's sort of I assume the complexity of these are like much simpler starting points. So what is the typical project, or what are sort of some examples of projects look like today?
Yeah, today it's kind of evolved as we've added more and more to Create. So at the beginning, we could just do like UI components. And so we got lots and lots of UI components and static web pages. Increasingly, we've been adding more of the primitives of like application development to Create. So whether that's componentization or multi-page or databases and backends. And as we've done that, we've actually seen like the community of people using Create really start to dive in and get deeper and deeper projects. Today, so we're still in like CRUD applications. We can do a really good job of those. But as we add things like backends, it really starts to like explode in terms of and become as varied as what you can do with real code. For a lot of our users, like the magic here is that they didn't have to learn how to code. They just had to kind of describe how they want it to behave and look, or better yet, remix something someone else created. And then create handles using LLMs to turn it all into code and deploying it and hosting it for them pretty automatically. So it's like opening up who can build and changing a little bit the how of how software gets made.
And Dhruv, I think I read in one of your blog posts that you see software creation as a spectrum. On the one end, you have, the super coders that are probably going to become more powerful with AI. On the other end, you have people that are, maybe no code whatsoever that are doing mostly drag and drop type stuff. And that maybe Create is somewhere in the middle. And that's, it's the ability to create code or create apps just from natural language and speech, but also to play with code as well. Is that still where you see Create going for this kind of middle ground of people, or do you see it going more towards people that only can sort of use natural language?
Yeah, it's. I think we're at the end of the day, we are trying to create like the ultimate software creation tool, right? And so my co-founder and I are obviously technical. We talk a lot about like, what would it take? What do we need to add to this for this to just be the better way to build than firing up our IDEs? Even with an AI-powered IDE, even with like, the existing really great ways you can deploy today, how is it that creates just like a better way to build? And so we're building towards that. I think for some use cases, like if you want to build kind of a cruddy app, I think we can be like really fantastic. But it's a high bar to clear to kind of get there. In the interim, I think the people we see are very desperate are those who've never been able to create any software, right? And so there, I think that's where we had our initial like starting market. Funny enough, it ends up being like some pretty serious users. I wouldn't call them as like pure hobbyists, but it's people who are like, tech or software adjacent, like founders, designers, in some cases, IT consultants, agencies. They know why this stuff is powerful. Like they know what their developers can do that, they've never been able to do. In some cases, like, yes, they've tried low code, no code tools, but like drag and drop, it's still a pretty high barrier to like drag and drop and connect everything. And then also it's like not completely customized or not exactly how you want it to be. And so the fact that it's code under the hood in Create's case means that, you can control the UI down to the pixel. You can control the business logic down to like the algorithm and exact like information. And you can also integrate with anything that already exists. So if you have an existing app or an existing API you want to plug into, that's really cool. And in Create, we host it for you. We also give you the code. So like a big part of what my co-founder and I was talking about is like, yeah, like it's tough for us to build on lots of existing low code, no code things. Because you're going to run into that day where like, okay, like I need the code. I want to run it myself. I want to go customize it in some way that the platform doesn't support. And so that's kind of some of the principles that are kind of baked in that make us appeal to both people who are very technical and like the convenience, and as well as people who've never been able to build.
And do you find people are starting more like a de novo project, like think of it as a website builder that they then get deeper on with like a CRUD app to support some functionality they want on the website? Or is it more like they have some enterprise app internally and they kind of need to just like create some more piping or tooling between those, kind of like an integration ware? Or what turns out to be kind of common here?
Yeah, like the super common use case that people just come in and try is like, make me a simple landing page, make me a simple website. Then what we see power users do is like, as they start to adopt the tool, is I wish it was like, oh, we were stuck in some like really clean vertical. But we do see power users start to like build across lots of these different use cases. So it can be like an app to run your community, an AI powered tool that hits GPT to like do something and help like parse your work. All the way to like, the actual web page that people come to check out these tools and to like try them. As we've added more functionality like functions and the ability to hit existing stuff, we're really early. I think we launched functions like 2 weeks ago, but we're starting to see people inevitably use that capability to now hit like, an existing enterprise app or an existing piece of software and then pull that data and build on top of it with Create. So we're still pretty early. I think we will see a lot of these horizontal use cases appear, because really what we were like replacing is, whipping out your editor and being able to like build everything, and people build all sorts of things with an editor.
Mm-hmm. And are people? Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Oh, so are people typically like? Could I take the source code that's output? I guess I can run it deployed on Create, but I could also copy paste it. Can I drop it into some third-party hosting or kind of serving tool? Or
totally. I just had a user the other day tell us like he's running it. He showed me a Create app he made. He's running it on Render, and I was like, oh, why are you using Render? He's like, I like Render. I know Render. I think that's kind of the power of giving you the code. It's just a Next.js project, and you can run it and host it yourself if you want.
And then are they generally like public? Like, is the source code in the projects, are they generally public where anybody else who's using Create can see them? Or is it more like a public, but you maybe have a private repo or something like that? Or how does the kind of permissions work?
Yeah, we're freemium by default, and free projects are public for now. Business users can pay for private projects, and then we don't expose them kind of in our community feed. But DK, I know you've talked about the idea of like remixing software. So like part of the power here, we think, is that, you know, if 1% of people are really going to figure out how to build, even in a much easier way to build, like natural language and pre-deployed, you know, maybe 10% of people will be able to like take something and then like customize it to what they actually want. And like, I actually think like 90% will probably just be users if we do our jobs right. And so we want to make that easy and want to make discoverability really easy. It's interesting as you think about like the marginal cost of generating any of the software going to zero, kind of like the ideas you guys have been kind of discussing here. It's like, really, what do you really care about, like specific like individual piece of software if you can grab and remix and use anyone else's like code? And that's a little bit new of a concept. Actually, it's not that new. I guess open source is very much like this as well. Yep. And so we definitely lean a little bit more that way, which is like, you can use Create for free. We'll pay for your OpenAI credits, but to like generate a lot of this stuff. But as part of that, you're contributing to like the remixability of everyone's applications.
Right. And it looked to me, I mean, I've already seen, you know, in the last couple of weeks, you and some other folks are already making videos, taking functions, linking into like Zapier calls, which was really cool to me because that's a tool that a lot of people already know how to use. So one of the first things that came to mind for me is kind of like in WordPress, where we see a lot of these people that become super specialists. Maybe not everyone is using WordPress themselves, but there are a lot of people that are doing hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of these sites over time, like as agencies or, you know, professionally. Are you already starting to see some of those power users not only building code for themselves, but for other people? I think I remember seeing maybe someone was even charging for prompts. I don't remember if that was
that was
real.
Really exciting to us, or kind of cool, which is like my dream for this is that like Create can, and we have a lot to build to get there, but like that people can actually like, you know, make money on Create and like build things on Create and kind of go end to end. And so we have started to see some students start selling courses on Create. But then what's more interesting than just the course and the blog post, like paid blog post, was they actually built a prompt generator for Create.
That's cool.
That they built with like a custom GPT, and then they actually built a like custom prompt generator with Create that they then charge for access for. And so we're adding, like, you know, payment rails and auth and things like this, like that can enable people to, you know, build their own businesses that are like entirely based on Create. And yeah, I think we'll see this template. We have seen selling of templates and people like basically creating templates or creating tutorial videos, which is exciting. And I think something that like we're going to try to continue to encourage.
And what's the scope of a template? Like, is it wholesale, like would it be like a storefront or something? If I wanted to, almost like a Shopify type competitor, would that be like one type of template? Or like, I'm just trying to make sure I understand the scope that people would think about here.
Yeah, I mean, the template, it can be like any type of use case. So the one that I saw the other day that I liked was like someone sold a really nice like waitlist site connected to a database, connected to a function that like sends emails to you when someone signs up for your waitlist. And today we need to get forking right, but like you can just fork that entire project and then you can start from there. And they've figured out like all the components of the waitlist site you'd want. They figured all of these are in natural language, so like you can just quickly like update them and change them. And that's like a little bit of like what a template would kind of look like in my mind. The cool thing is like these templates are just Create projects, right? So someone's kind of done the work of generating all the right code through natural language, but then you can grab it and update and customize any piece of that.
And when they're running a business like selling templates, are they selling it as like a one-time, like I make this template, you can then take it, fork it in your own direction, you pay one time? Or are people like thinking about ways to make subscription templates, kind of consistent updates and stuff?
I haven't seen subscription templates yet on Create. I have seen
new idea.
I mean, it's interesting. I have seen this one-time like access, like, hey, I compiled a bunch of like cool templates for this purpose. Like, do you want to pay for it? But we're early. I'm sure. Like, I think it's so funny. As I mentioned at the top of the like we started Create as almost a developer marketplace on top of a code gen system. And like now it's so funny, we've almost come full circle where now people, now that Create, the platform is like starting to grow a little bit, people have access all the time. Like, hey, can I like pay somebody to help like update my Create project? And can I like have them like, you know, like I don't know how to natural language prompt to like get all this stuff. But I would pay somebody. And so there is a world where we like really come full circle in a couple of years and try to enable the ability, like if you're working on a Create project as we grow the community, like can you just like have somebody come help you out and help you maintain the software you're making on top of Create?
Yeah,
it's badass.
I think
oh,
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, you touched, Dhruv, on two sort of big trends here that DK, I know you've written a lot about and I really enjoy. And I'd love to get your take on, you know, not just Create as the platform itself, but maybe where it fits in these two big trends. And the trends are, you know, the cost of software creation coming down to zero, the sort of Cambrian explosion of software. So the value creation, and then the other trend being, you know, or question where that value is actually going to accrue. On the software creation side, is it your view? I know there's been somewhat of a debate that, you know, in the future, as large language models and, you know, associated models keep getting better, AIs are going to do all of the coding for us, or that there's always going to be sort of a human in the loop that, you know, whether it's a non-technical user or a technical user is sort of the one that's sitting there assisting the code. It seems like you guys are making a pretty big bet on human in the loop. Is that sort of your thesis on where this all plays out?
Yeah, we're making a big bet on human in the loop. It's funny, an early version of Create, we tried the agentic approach. And at least for now, with the current rate of model development and just the experience that we saw, we kind of, our take is that for at least the next 5-10 years, we suspect it's going to be human in the loop. The main reason for that's like the context problem. It turns out like if you actually are creating something, like it's actually a lot of work to tell someone the context of like what it is you want to create and pass that context back and forth. And so in theory, I could imagine a world where like maybe an agent knows every single thing about me and exactly how I want like my business, but it's a lot of work to kind of get there infrastructure wise before you could really have like an AI that's collected all the right context to build exactly what you want. Instead, what we think is like if you can just empower that builder who already has all the context in their head of exactly how something should be, but can make them just so much more efficient, you can really drive down like the relative like time costs that it would take. And so as you do that, you know, I see this my own behavior. Like I generate all sorts of things on Create just because it's like so easy that like now projects I would never otherwise build, you know, I at least take a swing at them or I try them and I get them off the ground. And so, yeah, at least in terms of like, will it all just be done for us? I think humans will want to be creative. And I think as humans, like, you know, are powered with these tools, they'll end up creating lots more than they ever did before, as opposed to being stripped of like the agency of things being created for them. Or at least that's what I hope. Who knows? Maybe someone will come out with an agent that can do it all the creation and then Create will probably enable that. But until then, we're in this world.
I think there's always the sort of like time and kind of complexity structure that is underspecified with all software. So if I were to sit here today and try to write a really great spec, and I've, you know, been involved in software for kind of a long time, so I should be able to kind of do a decent job, but I would certainly fail at corner cases and edges that were underexplored or underspecified. And it seems like without human in the loop, you know, it seems hard to get enough of that context in. So I actually think that the fact that you're coming full circle makes a lot of sense, because it does seem like, you know, letting humans do that push and pull and tug and context setting can be helpful. But it brings me a little bit to like trying to understand the evolution of the interface of Create, because I think I've used a few different versions of it over the, I don't know, when do we connect on Twitter? We were DMing maybe, I don't know, 6 months
ago, maybe. Yeah. I think around the time you wrote the piece, I was like, oh yeah, this is spot on a lot of what we are thinking, but we've been kind of heads down building it since then. So it's evolved a fair amount.
But my recollection is like the interface for how I specify something has evolved a bit. And like today I'd almost call it, I don't know if this is a reasonable shorthand, but it's almost like a Figma paradigm of like a, you know, a workspace. And I think it's like a shared workspace maybe, but it's a workspace and I have like a design mode and a build mode. And I'm wondering, like, how do you think about the iterative requirements gathering and further specification process within kind of the workspace kind of UI mode?
Yeah, so we've gone through a couple of iterations on Create. So the first version we launched was just it was like a command and then a version history, and you would send these commands. You have to wait 30 seconds for it to generate, and that was fine for like simple UI components. But as we've started to add more functionality that you can do, like we've kind of had to evolve the UX in parallel. So the next big jump for us was like real-time building, and so rather than just like a one-line command of like, oh, please do this, we actually had a spec editor. And the spec editor was just like, blank a text editor. But as you were typing, we would actually real-time like regenerate the actual app and like build it. And this worked well for like single pages. We could get like a lot less of like a delay. A lot we had to figure out around like how to get the code to render really fast. And the canvas is something we just launched a couple months ago, but it's because we started adding the ability to have multiple pages, multiple components. As part of that, you've also seen like we're adding additional controls beyond just natural language. So you get started in Create with natural language, you specify a high level thing, but if you want to, change what the padding on a particular page is like, it turns out there's just really, really good ways of like doing that. And you can try to train users to say like, now you have to say 12 pixels padding, and that way will work if they decide to write that. But wouldn't it be cooler if you can just click on it and drag a padding slider to get exactly what you want? And shouldn't that just update the code? Now, what's really hard is like, and like what's technically hard and technically interesting is like you can generate any type of code on Create, and we have to generate UI controls in a kind of generative UI way where you can like update that code, because a lot of our users, couldn't necessarily update the code themselves even if they wanted to. And so, we're building a lot around like the code, but we aren't so dogmatic on like, oh no, everything must be like natural language text. If there's a better UX pattern for seeing all these things in concert, then we'll build it into the product. The thing that is like we are kind of like taking firm on is like you are generating code, so that once you're done, you can just publish and you don't have to have this like translation step. So to your point earlier, like I think what's really important is like creating a really, really tight iterative loop, because yeah, you're right, like single shot thinking of every single part of the spec and what it should be is a lot harder than just like starting to get in there, building, like discovering, testing out your app, like, and then adding more where you need to. And then we'll also start to use AI to like help you with this process. So like maybe you don't have to specify every common edge case to something you want. But if you say like, I want a text input, it should like take in an email address, maybe we should expand your prompt to also tell it like, yeah, I should handle the common things that, you expect to handle with taking in an email address. So I think we can move people up that like building curve where maybe they weren't like the world's best PM at thinking about every single thing to build. But we know a lot about like what goes into building products. And once we know what you're trying to do is this, then we can help you do an excellent job of doing that.
Right. And I love the dogma. Is it that the code, the original source code always has to be available? Is that kind of the dogmatic point you're making?
That's maybe the one thing that we're dogmatic about. We care a lot that this is code, and like what that means. So we're not generating like a DSL. We're not generating like a JSON that then gets used in our format. We're trying to have it be code you could run if you wanted, and code you could customize. We haven't, funny enough, we've been pushing forward like how much you can do without launching code editing directly, just as like a way to hold one hand behind our back to make sure that this thing is actually a really powerful builder on its own. Although over time, I'm sure we'll also add like the ability to edit the code directly in Create as well.
I've got kind of a crazy idea. Like if you take this to a little bit of a logical extension. So whenever I use Create, I kind of start from Create and I like come up with an idea and I try to like coax it into doing the thing I'd like it to do. But given the sort of dogma around code, could you imagine a day, or is it like too far afield to say like just like take everything in from GitHub and make it all everything open source runnable on GitHub, make it now Create enabled, where I could take a GitHub URL, kind of link to a source repo and be like, hey, do this, but then make it do this other thing I want it to do. Kind of sort of start with some open source GitHub repo as my starting point.
Yeah, what's so funny and so interesting, 100%. And what's so interesting about that is like we actually do see a number of projects where somebody just grabs some code from somewhere else and pastes it into Create, and then runs it on Create. And I think part of the reason is like, LLMs are good at translating like, okay, what's the intent of this code, right? And so even though they're not looking at the underlying like React TypeScript code we're running, they want that intent, and like code's just another way to communicate that intent. And so we see lots of people grab like some Python like for like a demo and then paste it in, and we can translate that pretty much to a running demo in Create. Different reasons for that behavior every single time. Sometimes code is actually just the highest fidelity way to communicate. Like you might just want to be able to say, I want it exactly like this. And so, yeah, we definitely want to support that. We also want to support all the import mechanisms. Today, you can import lots of things through Vision, essentially. So you can take a screenshot, paste it into Create, and then do that for all your screens, get a starting point, and then rebuild. Cool. But we do want to build faster ways of doing that. So yeah, take a GitHub URL. As context windows start to increase, and speed honestly increases, more we can do with this. But before it's been a little tough to ingest an entire repo and get decent results.
Do you find like the context window increase, is it much different or better with one particular API or provider than others, or are they kind of all increasing roughly at lockstep with each other?
I think we see that OpenAI has been in the lead. We have to eval all the time, and I think what we're excited about is as all the models improve, Create improves, and we use different models for different things, and so we can build just a better like workflow tool for building than stringing together a bunch of calls yourself or trying to do it in a chat UX. And so we do see different models do better at different things. I think the cool thing for us has been, OpenAI is definitely like what we call the best all-around workhorse model, and it's what's like our free model. But we do see like when Anthropic launched like the longer context windows, or when Google launches the longer context windows, there's just more you can like do with it. You can like stick in an entire CSV, or stick in a giant document, or whatever you want as like the underlying spec. Even more important and even cooler, I think, is we enable you to integrate those models into your own apps. And so what's been fun is people can then, even if they don't know how to code, like they can build their own app that like that uses Google Gemini and something else. And so right now, with all the buzz in AI and like everyone wanting to build even like small micro businesses or like micro wrapper apps that build use things with AI, like you can build those on Create and use any of the different model characteristics yourself.
When you think about some of like the upper bounds on what you can do with Create, so I played with it a little bit already, and I was able to make one cool app around planning a summer vacation in the Mediterranean. That was pretty cool. I made a simple function for converting a Nostr key to hex format, which we'll talk more about later. But then one thing I was playing with a little bit this morning, and I couldn't quite get it to work, and I probably need to play with it some more. But if I wanted to do something maybe a little bit larger, for example, I wanted to take a lot of data from some of these Nostr relays, which we'll talk about, and then fine tune an open source model like the latest version of Llama. Is that something that you think one day I would be able to do and Create, or is that just going to be too much data, or like I would have to pay for a much larger plan to do something like that?
I think I think we need to build a couple more primitives, but I don't see like why that shouldn't be possible, right? Like I actually do a fair amount of fine tuning for Create itself to try and like get certain features, and a lot of fine tuning is like data cleaning in a certain like, format, and then hitting an API of one of these fine-tuning APIs. And so today we have the ability to hit APIs through functions. With your functions, you could do a lot of this data cleaning. We probably just need a better way for you to pull in that data than uploading it all into like a spec.
It's a lot of data too.
Yeah, it's a lot of data, like, and keep it locally. So yeah, the ambition is like, create the best like application builder. Kind of irrespective of like language and irrespective of some of these constraints. It's an open question, like how fast can we get there versus like how quickly does like the edge of the frontier of coding and what you need to like build change. I don't have a strong answer yet. Like there's a shot that we always kind of lag behind the very, very cutting edge of what's possible. But I think the one thing that gives us hope of staying on the cutting edge is that there is code under the hood, and so arbitrarily supporting, a new runtime or a new framework or a new technology it's some engineering work for us, but it's not too much engineering work that would ever fall like super far behind like the very latest best way to do something.
The
Cool.
sort of the platform description of what Create can do is so broad. You could imagine it, just sort of solving everything software, right? But I also could imagine that there are, certain use cases that could come up that become such a deep need or such a good focus that you might choose to sort of avoid or sort of abandon some of the breadth for some depth. And I just wonder how you think about like how much to chase some verticalization when important, or how much you just want to be super committed to the breadth approach.
Well, I just thought of one thing that actually does limit like, how much on the edge can be. And that is like, what do the language models know about? Right. So I think that is like one limitation to, if someone creates a new framework like today and a language model needs to be trained, at least today, how quickly can we adjust the context on how that framework works, and like how quickly can the models reason about how that framework should work? If we did like much more like in-prompt, like training of like, okay, I want you to like interact with this, and we do this for like APIs. Like you've never seen this API, but here's all the docs in an API. Like now use this API. I can pretty much guess how to use that API, but there might be some things that it's unable to write like good code for. In terms of your question, DK, like in terms of verticalization, we do see like head use cases, and I think we will prioritize those head use cases. I just think that part of the really magical AI products right now is like Perplexity or some of these other ones that we really like. It's like, yeah, like they are quite horizontal surfaces. I think it's because you can kind of type whatever it is you want. And part of our like philosophy is like the user is not like wrong. We just need to like figure out how to get Create to support that use case and make kind of a magical experience around it. So we will show off like really big head use cases, but I think it's much more akin to like Airtable, which is like, well, what is like, what can you use Airtable for? And like the answer is like hundreds of different use cases, and actually probably the long tail of what people use it for is like probably not even thought of.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Perplexity and that idea that the user is never wrong. Perplexity is one of the only, maybe the only AI tool that I actually use every day now. What do you think Perplexity has gotten so right, and what are you guys learning from them in Create, and you're trying to mimic and Create?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of respect for them. One thing that they got right in the early days, everyone was saying, why are you guys building GPT wrappers or whatever it is, right? And they had no shame in kind of like building a GPT wrapper, but they realized that like actually a huge part of the experience is like the user experience, and the user experience is made of things like latency and having like the world's best index and marrying that with language models and making a really good experience around related discovery and a lot of these like core pieces, along with like incredibly high pace of like product velocity. I kind of think we have a similar thing if we do Create right, which is that we just need to keep the pace of product velocity high, understand our users are coming to us like to solve this job, and that a lot of the job, yes, is accomplished through the language model, but there's actually a ton around the UX of building something that you can do, and around like the latency that goes into it. And actually that wrangling these models is a huge service to your users, just because you can get it from just because you can get some code from a chatbot that's still quite divorced from like the job that you're trying to get done or the software that you're trying to create and put out into the world. And so I respect that about them. And so, yeah, I think there's parallels to Create the project. We're in a different domain. We're not doing like an answer engine. We're actually kind of building a building engine in some ways for whatever you want to go make. But lots we can share in common.
The
cool.
building engine idea is really exciting to me because it feels like a very uncontrolled space. Like there's no, you talk about like, I don't know, Apple, Google, Meta, whatever. Like nobody really has a big toehold in like the building engine space, right? And so, yeah, I wonder like, who do you think sort of encroaches on this or touches on some of these themes to some extent? Like would Microsoft VS Code, would they start to get there?
Honestly, like early GitHub is kind of like maybe an equivalent. Like if you believe that like, lots of software will be specified in natural language, and natural language is kind of like a new like runtime for software, and so then the question is like, okay, like where do you like host these projects? Like where do you like discover these projects? Where do you like remix and use? Like GitHub even had the original forking. They're going much more after like traditional development. That's probably like one analogy. I'm trying to think who else. There's lots of people trying to solve the job of like what's the best way to make software. And so I think we're throwing our hat into the ring of like another way of making software, but I'm sure all the existing ways of making software will continue to get better and stronger, and also get AI powered and AI supercharged. And so it'll be kind of fun to see, can Create be like the preferred way of making software for many people?
Yeah, one idea I can't get out of my head is actually something that you wrote, DK. I mean, you've written 2 excellent pieces about this, but in one of your pieces, you talk about the marginal cost of creating software falling to 0, and you make the argument that whoever can build the best tool for building new tools or new software and own the distribution and sort of the I guess, substrate for people to come and remix and find projects and build on top of that, potentially could be the most important company of all AI, which is a bold and exciting claim. Why do you think that is? I'll throw that out to you, DK, and I'm curious your thoughts on that as well, Dhruv. Is it, and is the key piece there really the distribution? Like obviously the tools to sort of speak something to existence, the magic behind that's very important. But to me, at least, it seems almost even more important to be that place where people come, the new platform for distribution, for discovery, and the remixing, the ability to say, here's what exists now. I can quickly kind of meld or evolve 2 things together. Is that a fair sort of interpretation of what you're thinking?
Yeah, you're saying for what I'm thinking?
Yeah, for what you're thinking. And also, Dhruv, your take on it too.
Yeah, I can share a little bit about that. So I kind of think that this idea of building software, making it easier for more people to be involved in the process of building software is like that's the big idea in AI. Like, yeah, self-driving cars are nice, they're wonderful, they work, it's huge, but like
they're sweet, yeah.
But enabling like 8 billion people, everybody has a need for software, right? There's literally every person on the planet has need for custom software, and we've all basically thrown up our hands and said, it's good enough. I guess I'll just rely on some developer who knows how to do this fancy black magic stuff. So everybody's basically gatekept from getting their ideas embodied in software. And I think the big idea that Create is touching on here is that you can actually enable all 8 billion people to get exactly what they want. And you can retrain people to say, you don't have to just accept that it's good enough. We can actually give you something that's really exactly what you need and what you want right now. I think that's like a super exciting idea. And I think if you can build that and, serve everybody with that, I think it is, it has the potential to be like, maybe the most impactful company in technology. Now, what of that is like, I think so many of the contours and shapes and edges of how this thing makes it into the world is kind of all changing real time. So, big trends like, where does this stuff get deployed? Do I deploy it on my own website? Where is the data hosted? Do I like own and control that, or do I host it on like Nostr relays or some other place? Like we can touch on that, when we talk about Nostr stuff in a bit. But like, how am I running PWAs, or am I launching apps into an app store, or is this a new app store that is itself kind of a PWA enabled app store like thing? And sort of how do the business models work? Is there like a centralized toll that's collected on maybe running the models, but maybe not on serving or distributing? Or, sort of like, I think it's all up in the air. I think, it's hard to say that we have like a strong opinion that, it has to be this way. It's more like everything's changing, which is what makes it really exciting. And so if we're exploring the edges of like, what does it look like to deploy any software to anybody, totally censorship resistant, like Apple doesn't control it, Google doesn't control it. The payment flow may go through OpenAI today, but it may go through Llama or some other serving infrastructure in the future. Like, I think literally everything is up in the air, which is why I'm like so tuned in and excited about this concept. But yeah, I guess does that kind of answer what you're asking, Max?
Yeah. And I'd love to hear your reaction to that, Dhruv, and particularly on where you kind of see Create falling into that sort of amorphous question.
Yeah, I mean, part of why DK and I got in touch was I read his piece and I was like, yep, spot on. We also are trying to figure this out and see like the early signs of it. But yeah, I think it's like a Vinod Khosla quote that's like, there'll be 1 billion new programmers over the course of the next decade. So completely agree with like David's like take that like this is probably the biggest shift ever. It's how they align with the mission of the company ourselves. Like we get into this because part of why we got to have any leverage in life is like we could talk to the computers, and like once you can talk to computers, you can have like software that runs while you sleep and can help you like do all sorts of things. And like really it is a changing of the economic like calculus of software creation. It is and it isn't, because distribution still matters. You probably still, to get like any piece of software like out and into the world, like there probably is still some R&D cost, right, to like come up with the very best like piece of software for a given niche. Like these things are not going away. Data is another interesting piece. Like so like I don't want to like overhype it, but for some like portion of like software, it's clear that like this is a very big change in just the calculus around like how can you make something. And so very different things are going to be made, and for right now we're focused on like being the very best way to make those things and trying to be responsive to our users as they want to make those things. Around how can Create be the best way to do that. I think there is like a phase 2 that we're just starting to get into, where you also become a little bit of like a distribution platform for finding this stuff and discovering this stuff, and being a place where people come to find things. I think is always like a superpower. Like I think like one funny behavior that I'm noticing myself is like I just watch lots of podcasts on YouTube now. And I don't know if you guys host this podcast on like YouTube, but
DK does.
And it's surprising to me because like like Spotify ostensibly is like the world's best place, has tons of the supply, but YouTube is just like nailed discovery of all like video format, and that algorithm is like so good at giving me exactly like what it is I want. And so now it's like eating that form of like creation and that medium as well. And so I think with the same thing, like how do we just become a really, really fantastic place for discovery of everything being made on Create? Today we're not yet there, but like I think that's like a key part of how this becomes really, really big, is that you can also be a way to distribute different pieces.
And how do you even, I mean, one thing I've been trying to wrap my head around is what is the discovery platform for software? Like what does the form factor of that even look like? I agree. It seems like step one has to be get a lot of really great software and a lot of really great projects. And so it makes total sense that you're focused on that, those tools now. But like in the future, when you think, 10, 15, 20 years out, are we sort of like right, left swiping on various components in an app? Are we, in sort of an IDE or IDE type environment? And, we can see kind of like almost like community nodes of people that have built similar things that maybe we can drag in and out. Or are we just talking to an assistant that, we're literally speaking something into existence, like, no, actually, I want you to find the best, whatever UI component from all the other people that I know or trust online, and, change the color and that component to this. What's your best guess for both of you guys of what that looks like?
David, do you want to go first?
Simple question, DK.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Geez, I don't even know. I mean, my head goes to kind of the open source movement broadly, and how I think it's underappreciated how important it has been and how important it will be. And what I mean by that is when we've had Linux for 30 years or so now, and we wouldn't have these services like Google or Meta. They could not operate in the old model. They actually need open source operating systems to work. And that was fortunately solved a couple of decades ago when those companies were getting started. But I think like the whole model for how open source software will pair with the ideas of Create and sort of these ideas of everybody can generate, because it's easy to generate, everything is kind of freely available and forkable and usable by everybody. And it kind of it changes all the contours of what you charge for and how you store data and how you run algorithms for discovery. And now the Nostr view of this, which we haven't really, we call it purple pilling. We haven't really purple pilled it yet.
I'm excited to try and get purple pilled.
Yeah.
But the Nostr view of this would kind of be like, okay, the data can live anywhere on relays. The algorithms may be transparent and pluggable. And so as a Create layer, you're really like orchestrating all of the activities from all software, which is open source, and maybe helping manage payments from different providers and serving infrastructure and maybe people who have, like these templates you're talking about, or maybe an early piece of like they've done some sort of work that they want to, sort of have a value exchange for incorporating into a project. But I think like the nature of open source software and how LLMs help everybody create software and make the marginal cost of each additional creation trend towards zero. I think it just changes all the dynamics for everything here. So sorry, I got a little bit maybe off track with what Max was specifically asking, but that's where my head is on this this part of the conversation.
Yeah. My take is it's similar. I think like around like how will you discover already existing software? Like one thing we've been thinking about is how important it is to create at least that we're actually running the code that you are creating on Create. And like one thing that kind of informs my opinion here is I actually think a lot of like the pain in software development is integration. So somebody makes this like piece of cool open source software. I think that's cool. Like, can I get that running in my repo, and like how soon and how fast? And it conflicts with like this dependency I have, and so now I'm spending like hours trying to like get these two things to resolve. And so really like, and software is like only is useful if it's like running, right? And being used by somebody and like actually deployed. And so a lot of like what we think is, it's still super early, but what we think is really cool is like at least at Create, we have a view of like what's running and what's being used and what's like what's actually like being worked on and like why, and that gives us a little bit of a signal of like this is actually software that like compiles and runs and works and like is not running into errors in production. And that I think allows us to do a better job of curation, to your point around discovery of like, well, here's the stuff that's actually like getting used, and here's like that's like being used for similar purposes. Because we're doing natural language on the intent side, we actually know why it was kind of created, like what the purpose of that software was, right? As opposed to just like the raw code. Like we're actually seeing like, okay, someone wanted to make a waitlist tool or an internal tool to like curate X sites, and we know that was the purpose for why this got made, and then we actually see it all the way to how it got made. And so when the next person wants to come along and asks, I think you're asking like, is this an assistant? Is this a like feed? Is this like you swipe through like different options? I think we have to figure out what the right UX for that is. But I think that's just a really cool data source to start to like build on top of both the intent of why it was made and then also the fact that it is running. And then switching this stuff in and out, I think it's been one reason why, at least so far, we've only stayed on one stack of like, we're just going to do TypeScript, React, web apps, right? It's hard enough to get those all running and working the right way. But as we do that, like then maybe it increases the like fungibility and remixability of software made on top of Create.
Have you played a lot with PWAs, or do you sort of have a view that these are like growing in importance yet in kind of the ecosystem as far as you see it?
But you mean like progressive web apps, or? Yeah. Okay. I just want to make sure we're talking about the same PWAs. Yeah. No, definitely. I haven't played a ton, but yeah, I mean, we build like, what's your favorite example that you're thinking of?
So we use, Max and I use a site called Stacker News, which is kind of think of it as like a subreddit for Bitcoiners. Yep. And it's written as a web app, but then they kind of extended a little bit with PWA functionality, so you can get like push notice and stuff like that. So that's like the one PWA that I use every day, but it kind of opens my mind. Like when you start thinking about app stores and deploying apps to the Google Play Store or the iOS App Store, you have to get developer keys and an account you have to pay them for, and then you have to go through the review and approval process. Whereas PWA is just like, okay, post up on the web, as long as it serves, anybody can use it and it's cross-platform and all that. So it feels like Create, being mostly a website, might be well positioned to also sort of simplify PWAs as mobile app kind of distribution. And Create would be a hub, like you're saying, what the intent was, why somebody created something. So you might be able to, in a sense, help the next person looking for similar things figure it out, or find that already existing spec work that's been done. And if it's all deployed and available via PWAs, it almost seems like Create in one version could be could serve some of the features that an app store serves today, but could do it in a much simpler, kind of lighter weight way.
Yeah. I mean,
That's
we have
super
talked
cool.
about the infinite app store, right? Or the like as like an early concept, but I think you need to solve a lot of like the issues that today block people from deploying against app stores. If you're going to try and create an alternative app store.
Mm-hmm. One thing that popped into my mind as you were speaking, Dhruv, is I think about DK and I have talked a lot about over the last couple of years, sort of Google search and how to disrupt Google search, or potentially new sort of verticals where Google search type experience could emerge. And one thing that you just said that really kind of clicked for me is, I've been thinking a lot about when Google search launched in relationship to the internet, or to the web at least. And, I think Yahoo launched in 94, and it was pretty small still, I think on the order of thousands of websites. And then when Google launched in 98, I think it was 98, there was on the order of, I forget if it was tens of millions or hundreds of millions, but a lot more web pages. And it seems like there was some sort of like magic moment where basically the ease of publishing text, it was text first and then I guess commerce, but text just got super easy. And I know, like in my own experience, I love writing and I love blogging, and with stuff like WordPress and certainly even Twitter, it just gets easier and easier. Just like, okay, 140 characters or even a longer web page or web post, as long as I can literally just type out my thoughts and click post, just super easy. And so I'll post all the time. And, in the case of coding, I wouldn't describe myself as an engineer by any stretch of the imagination, but I do enjoy coding, and I did it, pretty hands-on for a couple of years. And the reason I stopped is I just would get so frustrated, to your point of like integration. I don't have the patience, like, of this fucking API is not hooking up correctly in, this database. I just don't have that patience, but I enjoy putting the pieces together. And I think to myself that if it really were as easy as publishing a blog post, I'd probably be coding all the time. And I guess that's the vision of Create. And so coming back to the Google thing, I wonder, right now GitHub is kind of the de facto home for software, but it's still so early. And, I wonder, as a lot more people, as we get 3, 4, 5 orders of magnitude more code on the web, same with publishing web pages, there's probably some magic moment where a new search engine or search engine like experience emerges that has some kind of either proprietary data or algorithm. And we thought a lot about this in sort of Nostr land stuff like market rank and some other stuff. But just what you were saying is a great point. Knowing in the same way that PageRank was able to see, like, well, what links all the way back to Stanford, like what actually has that trust flowing through there. Another way of saying that, like with open source packages, like, okay, what open source packages are actually used throughout the web and how have they been sort of rated? That's extremely valuable signal. And I wonder if there's going to be a magic moment, kind of like the 98 moment, where it's like, okay, there's now enough code online, potentially from non-coders, quote unquote. And that's the moment to start really surfacing and try and figure out like how to search and surface the magic signals of what's being used. And maybe that's an opportunity for Create.
Totally. When you get there first, or a lot of people are just making lots of software. But yeah, but I think that opportunity is actually like broader than just Create, right? Somebody could actually like, and I've seen projects like this that try to like rank the top like npm packages by usage, or try to, crawl like what's actually being used. And yeah, I mean, apps are very hard. Like Google has to do a lot of work to actually even crawl like the inside of like applications and like understand what people are actually like building and using and running. So. Yeah, there's a rich like surface area here as well. I think like one thing, returning back to AI agents, like lots of people are trying to build web browsing agents, and I think it'll be like another interesting discovery where agents can kind of go off on the web and take action for you and kind of surface like there's a world of the future where like your agent's actually like booking the flight for you or booking like a particular piece. And yeah, I just think that even that's gonna be interesting. Like, okay, well, like if you are a creator, like how do you like make a really agent optimized site, right? Or how do you like make a site that's very parsable by AI and like can Create help you like do that, right? Or Create help you experiment with that. Like, is site making itself just going to change with the different users that are kind of coming to things? And so, yeah, there's so much opportunity right now that honestly we're just trying to stay focused on helping whoever comes to Create and what they want to build and figure out how to make the next version of it.
Have you seen any demand, or do you currently support things like deploying to a custom domain?
We do. It's a little manual today, which is why we have it behind our like business plan. But we are going to build it into the product so that you can quickly not use our created.app and can instead have your own custom domain.
Because that seems like a big thing for empowering people. Like if you can copy and paste code outside, but if you know, the simple thing is just run it on Create, and I can still get all of the kind of personal branding and kind of whatever I might care about SEO or domain authority from, you know, sort of my place. It just happens to be powered by Create.
Yeah, we give you a created.app domain similar to like a Vercel.app, or I think Replit has, I forget Replit's one, but where you can get a quick like domain on us on a separate domain than us. But yeah, we need the ability for you to just connect that to any domain you want and you know, have your app run.
Yeah, I should share the story because I know I was telling you, Dhruv, about this, and I think I may have mentioned it, Max, but I had looked. I have a friend that I spend a couple hours with each week, tinkering with new toys, whatever things we're excited about and interested in, and we were taking this idea of like, hey, can we build an app just, you know, using LLMs and stuff? So we started with you know, assuming that Replit would be a good place to do that, and so we started. I think we were using, I don't know, Gemini or OpenAI or Claude or something, and we tried to create. It was a simple crossword puzzle. You just want to make like an app that's a custom crossword puzzle. You know, our own parameters of how many squares there are and what the clues are and stuff. And we were able to generate some of that, but pasting it into like the Replit workflow, we could do like a command line interface, but we couldn't have a deployed website for it. And we spent an hour and 50 minutes struggling with Replit. And we don't really know our way around Replit. We're sort of also figuring out the tool at the same time. We spent an hour and 50 minutes of the 2 hours trying to do this with Replit and trying to copy and paste code into it and get it deployed. And at the end of it, we couldn't really do it. And I was like, we only have 10 minutes left. Let's try Create. It's this tool I've been playing with and know about. Let's see if we can get something up. And within that 10 minutes, we actually got the crossword puzzle built and deployed, and we can actually use it now. So there's some rough edges, but compared to an hour and 50 minutes messing around with existing tools and then being able to get it basically, you know, functioning within 10 minutes was just mind-blowing for us. We were like, wow, this is the future. We can see it now. So kudos, you know, for having built the thing that actually solved that problem. You know, kudos to you, Dhruv, for that. Thanks.
Wow, that's so exciting.
There's your promo reel.
I know, exactly. I'm like, can I just cut this portion of the podcast and stick it up on the website where we don't have any testimonials or anything else yet?
Yeah, of course.
No, but that's so cool. I think, yeah, someone else I was talking to that actually was early at Replit said something kind of similar the other day, and it triggered me where he's like, yeah, like Replit is code first, and kudos to those guys. They made such huge innovation and just how easy it is to run code in any code you want and how quickly on the browser without needing to worry about all the stuff that goes into getting an environment up. Because Replit might be code first, but like Create feels like application first. Like you guys are just kind of moving up the abstraction plane where you're really moving from like, yes, there's code under the hood and that's cool, but the focus is like, no, you're building an application. And when you do that, I think a lot of like subtle choices change, right? Where you're not trying to support all the code, you're trying to support what's the fastest path to application, right? And today, those applications on Create are a certain style. I think we want to eventually support all types of applications you make. Maybe this is a good time to have you guys Nostr pill me. But I think just different UX decisions and product decisions, even down to like the AI prompting changes when you do that. It's so funny though. This whole space is moving so fast that, you know, we talk a lot about like, okay, like where like what else should we make moddable and Create, and like what should we allow the user to have more control over and use Create for, and what should we like handle for them and abstract away for them, and a lot of like, picking these abstraction boundaries and determining like what is easy to build on your system and what's hard to build on your system. So it's really exciting to hear that, you know, at least for the use case you guys were trying to build, that it was quick on our product.
And I'm actually curious here because I have some familiarity with Replit. DK, what about Create made it so much easier? Was it the hosting piece particularly that was challenging Replit, or what was the major difference?
Well, I think the default assumption with Create is that you're building a web application, and that's not the case in Replit. At least the entrance that we went through, kind of this, the template sort of we were starting with, was kind of like we were able to first build the crossword puzzle as a command line interface thing. And so I was able to like do the crossword, but I was like, trying to get it to print ASCII art for me first. And when I finally got it to like, I wanted it to be a graphical interface. So I got it to do like, I think some sort of like a vector graphics package that would then draw that out, but it wasn't drawn out for the web. So then I had to like try to coax the vector graphics package to be more like web compatible rendering. And then of course, like, deployment is a whole separate piece. So I was getting, we're sort of like, we kind of know enough about what we're doing, but we also had no idea how to do it with these tools. So we were really struggling to get it to just do a web application. I think Create starts from the abstraction, like, hey, we assume you're here to build a web application. Let's go.
Got it.
It's kind of at least what my experience with it was. And it sounds like you can do a bunch of other stuff that are not necessarily web applications, but involve other types of integrations. But coming to it with the assumption that it's a web application also has a pretty profound, it's obvious, but kind of profound, is that it's now shareable. I could make the thing I did in my tinkering session. I could make it. I could send you a link to it and be like, hey, Max, look at this thing I made. And
send me it. I want to see it.
I will, yeah. But in Replit, it's not default deployed to the web. And so getting it, being able to help you run the command line interface to do the thing like within the Replit environment, it just wasn't so obvious to me that would make sense for me to share to you.
Got it.
Yeah, I think we make, sometimes I talk to very technical people and they fall into one of two camps. Either like, they're like, well, I don't see what's so magical here. I could just, grab the code from my IDE and like ask it, these million questions and open all these files and generate all the code in all these places. And then for deployment, I'm going to do this. And they're like, I don't need Create. They don't realize like how many decisions they had to actually like know about and
Totally.
and understand and know how to connect all the pieces. And then there's a second camp, which is like, no, they know how many decisions like actually go into all this stuff. And actually what they care a lot more about is like, well, what is the purpose of the software? Like, what am I like actually trying to get done? And can I operate a slightly higher of an abstraction than like, what is the raw code?
We talked a little bit about, some of the big picture idea of software becoming much, much easier to create. So, we talked about, okay, the marginal cost of creating software maybe doesn't go to zero, but comes close to zero. I guess the other question that I wanted to just touch on is, sort of the economics of that. Like we talked a little bit about value creation. Obviously, it makes sense if orders and orders of magnitude of more software is created, a lot more value in the world. Where do you guys think value accrues in this world? Do you think that all of this software is given away for free? You've mentioned some people, for example, are already charging for things like templates. Do you think that software modules still have a cost? Is it a low cost? But, because and the sort of like Jevons paradox, like because so much, it's cheap, really cheap, but so many more people are using software that the total GDP of software goes up a lot. Or is this some kind of crazy Star Trek world where, hey, Create's a great deal, but, sorry, it's all being given away for free. I'm assuming that's not the case, but.
Yeah, it's a good question. I do think that there will be so much, I think like, the GDP of software will increase, not decrease. I just think like you'll have this many creators, this many people being creative. I think people will figure out ways to like do productive things with software. Where does the capture happen? If it's like previous waves, the capture will happen on whoever drives distribution and is the best like distribution mechanism for a lot of the software creation. I don't know if that's us or if that ends up being someone else that ends up capturing that opportunity. But yeah, typically it's like as things become more abundant, what becomes really scarce. It's attention, discovery, things like this. Can you be the, like, I hate to say gatekeeper, but because like gatekeeper has this negative like connotation, but actually like they do play a very important role in playing curation and like policing, and you have all the software running until generated like which of it's going to give you malware and which of it's not, and like where are the rights figured out so that you're not going to get sued if you use it, and like where is that discovery process like fast to get something that you actually want to remix. And so I think that's probably where I bet a lot of like the value capture will happen. I still also think that I'd like to think that the power law in software doesn't you don't just make it once and then throw it away. I think it'll be interesting to see which of these use cases start turning into that, where it's actually I don't care about it, but data has a stickiness to it. And so the moment you've actually instantiated some software around some data, now you're in some ways committing to some maintenance schedule or upgrade schedule and something. And so I think people will end up valuing people who can do a good job of maintaining software and creating good software around data. So I think there'll still be skill we'll pay for in software creation. It might look different than how we pay for it today, but my hunch is that there will still, the power law that exists in software today will still exist. And we might just have to figure out who's going to get paid for that once it's actually all created.
Yeah. Well, there's a bunch of ideas that you touched on there that I think are worth sort of using as a pivot point in our conversation to talk a bit about Nostr, because I think the idea that you're going after with Create is just, it's massive. It is like I said, I really believe it's the biggest idea in AI. But I also think the ways these ecosystems evolve are, everything's in flux, which I think is an exciting time to play, but also means you don't have to have it all figured out, because it's all going to change anyway. But I think the traditional style of thinking around things like you mentioned distribution and kind of gatekeeping being kind of a natural point for value creation, and I don't disagree, and I don't begrudge you building a centralized platform to do this. I think it's such a hard, ambitious goal to go after, that actually keeping it centralized for now is probably the best way to make good progress. But in kind of Nostr, in the Nostr world, there's a very different architecture which enables all kinds of different software to get built, and actually probably will cause value capture to happen in different ways. So I was gonna say, we're not here to convince you to change and create Nostr enabled or fully Nostrized today. But I think if we can share and discuss the ideas of how Nostr works, we'd love to hear sort of what it inspires in you, and sort of how it maybe shaped some of your thinking about what Create could do, or when would be the right time to touch it. So a lot of I'll give a little bit of the setup.
And just before we start, just to call out, I was an early 2013 era Bitcoin investor. I actually love a lot of the ideas of decentralization. I think it's got an really interesting part to play in AI. Part of why I'm excited to come on and jam with you guys today is I'm actually it's on my mind as well, which is okay. How do we bring this into a little bit of Create? But it's interesting. It's an interesting point you made. I think I think if it was easier to kind of integrate in and use, it's almost you have to sign up for how many problems we're going to solve right now. And right now we're trying to solve the integration of natural language to AI to creation and that process. And that's the hard problem we're going to solve right now. But over time, it's on my mind, which is is there a way to also pair business model innovation on top of what we're doing? Because if you look at Create today, it seems very much so the business models of old, and those are great. But I agree with you all that the interesting, I have a hunch that the most interesting opportunity here is that we're going to create so much more GDP and discoverability is being on the line. And so what is the business model around that? And what does that look like? And so I have a passing curiosity every time I talk to Max and you, DK, about it, of how does Nostr play in here? And please treat me as someone who's somewhat smart, but uneducated observer.
Yeah, we'll assume we don't know anything about Nostr, because really I think the goal I would have here from this conversation is I want to share enough of what we think it's that it's just starts to spark some ideas, and maybe you sort of come back and say, actually, what if we did this that way? Or actually, maybe it would not surprise me. One characteristic of the Nostr community is basically everything is open source. It'd almost be a sacrilege to build something that's not open source. So when people do it, everybody looks at them funny, what are you doing? Nobody's going to use that. so because everything you're doing, has kind of a tight coupling with that open source ethos, even if your platform is not designed to be open source, if you could enable more open source software to get built, and maybe you could pull down some existing Nostr clients, and which are all open source software. You can pull down all that software and then let people kind of will their own
remix it.
Yeah, remix it, will their own features into existence. and you could, help find maybe some commonalities between existing Nostr clients, and those become components or something that help the next wave of Nostr builders. Maybe don't even have to, they could use more like a create style LLM interface to the application instead of trying to figure out how to do, how to actually write the code themselves.
And one other goal for this that Dhruv and I talked a little bit about is, I would say it's an early community of users, but a rabid, very passionate community of users. And so one thing that I would love to see is that there's some thinking in the Nostr community around where is AI going to play a role. There's a whole concept of data vending machines, which we can touch on. But one thing that I would also love to see come out of this is, some of the sort of early Nostr adopters starting to play with tools like Create, to your point, DK, to further, the proliferation of Nostr clients, functions. Like there's already a lot of good open source software and libraries, but there should be 100x more of that. And perhaps Create can play a role in that.
Yeah, super interesting. Honestly, my co-founder, Marcus, is always trying to open source more and more of Create. We've been pretty heads down on trying to get like the core product to work first, but there's lots of things we're like innovating on. We're like, I don't think this is going to end up being proprietary. Like one thing we innovate on is how to clean code from an LLM so that it runs and renders and create. And we're like, this just seems like a good utility for like everybody to kind of have. We need to do some work to wrap it and turn it into a package and just go use. But if we did that, then like, can then someone else build? If Create's going to go build like a really great CRUD app generator and like business generator, like somebody else go create like a natural language Nostr client creator, or could that just be Create? And so, yeah, I'm super curious. The other angle that before you guys give me the quick overview on this, I am curious, like, how people build apps themselves with like, what's the process today to build like a Nostr client app? And like, really how much work would it take for us to enable that as yet another vertical that you can build in natural language? Because that's how I think we could get like tons and tons of like software kind of made, and even by relative like Nostr enthusiasts, but who aren't necessarily technical, and like don't necessarily know what's going on.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people like that who are who are very active on Nostr and believe in the ideology, but are not writing code. But if you could help enable them to take their favorite client and fork it or add a feature by willing it into existence, that would be really fun. And I think it would generate a lot of ideas. And because everything's so open source, the whole sort of compounding contribution, it would just, I think there's a lot of room to run here. But let me first set up, because there's some things to know about Nostr that may actually simplify some of the discussion or how you think about it. So I'll just give like a brief overview. If you think about sort of the way the web has progressed to date, there's usually, sort of, you're using a web app, you're using some front end that's coupled to some back end, and it's all accessed through a URL, right? That's just sort of like generally how the web grew up. And in Nostr, I think of as like a protocol for publishing, a new protocol for publishing on the web, which separates the client from the data store. And so if you think, simple example, a lot of people build Nostr clients that are kind of like Twitter-like clients, right? But when you use Twitter, you have to download the app from Twitter, and that's run by the company that runs the database. And so they're very, very tightly coupled. And if you remember historically, 15 years ago or so, Twitter used to have an API, and they would let you access the data as a developer, build third-party clients, but those actually kind of got shut down because it was inconsistent with the business model of advertising. You have to sort of own the service that is accruing all the attention. So Nostr sort of takes a hard view that the data is stored on what we call relays, and the clients can interact with the relays, and they interact with one or multiple relays, but the clients are not attached to the relays. So the clients really have very little power, right? And then the relays have very little power because they're all in competition with each other. So they have to like try as best they can to serve all of the data that's asked for them. But if you try to censor or shut some data down or something, like, it's not going to work. Your censorship, you can take it down, but like the next guy over, the next 15 other relays are going to be happy to serve all that data. So sort of it's a whole new architecture for how you do these things. And so what it enables is like very simple examples. Think about like the Twitter app. I don't know if you've actually used any Nostr apps yet? Or have you
I
heard
was,
of like?
yeah, actually, I was poking around after we chatted last week, and you guys
Okay.
were talking about the idea. I was like looking at it, like I saw a lot of different Twitter clients essentially, all on the same data store, which I guess is hosted on these relays, and then people are creating their own clients. So.
That's right.
So like Primal is probably the one I use the most. It's an iOS app. There's one called Damus. It's another iOS app. And there's one called Amethyst, which is an Android app. I haven't used it as much, but it's really well done, like super polished. All open source. Everything, all those are fully open source. And people have been working on them. Like I think Damus and Primal and Amethyst have each been, what is it? They've been at least probably a couple years.
A year and a half plus.
Full-time work on it, by really talented, small teams, but very talented people. So there's a lot of progress in those, but it's all open source. So I wonder if there's even just like as a straw man starting point, could you take, Primal, Damus, and just like ingest it somehow or copy paste enough of the client code? Because you don't have to deal with the data, the data store side of it. Just can you take that client code and enable somebody to like make a different, slightly different version or add a different feature to enable somebody to create something new with that application? So I don't know. That's a little bit of the overview plus an idea. I don't know.
And how do you sound?
I want to add one more sort of important piece of context in this, or two important pieces of context. One is the other, I think, really important thing to understand about Nostr is, in addition to the fact that all of the data is stored on relays, your identity is a public-private key pair, and that's very, very important because anyone that can do math or that has a computer that can do math on their behalf can create an identity. And so it's permissionless in that sense. And that's one of the core ethos of Nostr. Part of the core ethos of Nostr is any human and eventually any AI on the planet has the ability, the right that's inalienable to participate in the system. Because no one has to give you the identity. You can create it. As long as you can, use ECDSA, you can create your identity. So I think that's a really important piece. And then the other important piece of how that interacts with what DK was talking about with the relays, and where I think this is really interesting for Create, is it's almost imagine a world where every application doesn't need a backend. I mean, you can have a backend to like make things faster if you want to do caching and stuff like that, but like high level abstracted away, you don't need a backend. And so that's super interesting because now, what I think this potentially enables and gets to the point DK was saying with forking Primal or one of these clients, but you could really do this for anything, is the ability to not only build software, but to evolve software. And what I mean by that is, if you think about the way software evolves today, I mean, open source is fantastic. People are constantly taking projects, the code for a piece of software, they fork it, which sort of in evolutionary terms, reproduce, right? It gets remixed, and then hopefully it gets forked again. But at any point, if some piece of software itself doesn't work out or dies, whatever, the fork before it's still around, someone else can take and keep remixing. But the problem with the open source model as it stands today is the code is great, but it's missing where I think is the actual magic, which is the data. And in an example with another podcast that I did with one of the sort of more, in my opinion, eloquent and interesting Nostr builders, who's not just doing a Twitter client, he's actually thinking about sort of CDNs for this world. This guy, Stu, he gives a great example of a site like Couchsurfing. I don't know if you remember Couchsurfing, which was sort of a predecessor to Airbnb. Freaking awesome in that it made the cost of traveling for a lot of like broke backpacking people go, close to zero, because you could go around and travel, and you had this sort of reputation built up where like, I know this guy is not going to be a serial axe killer and murder me because 15 other people have crashed on their couch and have great experiences. But then, that site was hard to monetize. Some private equity group buys it, tries to squeeze the value out, absolutely kills it because these people are broke. And then all of a sudden, this beautiful public service and utility for the world was just gone, and all that data was gone. And like, it's a tragedy for humanity. And so what having this sort of no backend world and the ability for anyone to create an identity creates together is the ability to take identity and reputation and link that with data that lives, that anyone can access. and create all kinds of new mashups. And so imagine if Couchsurfing had published all of that data to these Nostr relays, along with the identities of who was rating who. Something that Deacon and I talk a lot about on the show is this idea of web of trust, the old cypherpunk idea of trying to figure out, who you actually trust, but not with any kind of centralized government or company issuing that trust, but from a real bottoms up emergent perspective. Well, now, if that data still lived out there, maybe the site Couchsurfing is gone, but someone else can come in and build its sort of next iteration of it with all of the data living on, the next evolution of that site. So the software is no longer just open source. The identity, the reputation, and the data all mixed together are. So you can imagine on a site like Create, imagine how powerful that is if you're not only building new sort of apps from scratch, but you're building apps that utilize existing identity, reputation, and data that lives ideally forever.
Yeah, it's super exciting. I mean, I think it's so interesting. We just started adding on like Create the ability to build backends and the ability to build data, but it is a really interesting question. Like, yeah, well then what does it mean to fork an app that had like a database made on Create? And it's cool you can make one. A lot of like simple utilities like just need a way to store some data, right? But if one of these apps gets really, really popular and now like the data is stored on Create and you can export that data, you can like some of these apps are like entirely the value of the app is just the data that the app helps you do. And like, yes, the UI gives you a good workflow for updating that data, but and some rules around it. But yeah, the remixing of data is such an interesting concept. I'm actually curious, like who enforces, I guess the protocol enforces the rules around how the data can be updated, or who, if everyone can build a client, like what enforces like, the data integrity of.
Yeah, so that's the public-private key pair that Max was mentioning. So when you start using Nostr for the first time, you create a public-private key pair. So the private key is called an NSEC, and the public key is called an NPub. And it's just like traditional public-private key cryptography. I could tell everybody about my NPub, and you can find me then. And I don't tell anybody about my NSEC, and I sign all of my messages with the NSEC. So when I'm pushing something to a relay, it's a message signed by my private key. And so anybody who picks it up can see that it was from me, it wasn't tampered with. Even if they don't trust the relay, they can see that this thing that the relay provided them was actually sent from me.
Sure, but I mean more like like you're saying there's no backends, but backends kind of like mediate our access to data, right? And so let's take the Twitter client example. Like if everyone can make clients for that same relay data, like who determines the valid ways data can be updated or like deleted? I guess everyone gets granted permissions entirely to the client, or like or do all clients subscribe to a set of rules that they're going to coordinate on how this data source like gets updated, or what's the Does this question make sense? Or
well, think of every piece of data as a signed message. Somebody signed it. So I could sign a message and push it out to 15 relays. Max could sign a different message, push it out to 13 of those relays or 16 or whatever. And then any client could say, I'm going to now pull down all those messages and compose them into any UI I want. I could choose to use a Twitter UI. I could choose to use some other UI. But basically, I have access now to pull in all the data, which are all signed messages. Somebody had to sign it, right? It's not just like system data, but it's more like some identity signed a message. I'm going to pull those messages and I'm going to present them in whatever way I want.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Cool. Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
And to sort of build on that a bit, there is, Nostr, which stands for Notes and Other Stuff Transmitted by Relay. Excellent name, it is itself a very, very simple standard. One of the reasons I'm so bullish on it is I think it's basically impossible to come up with a simpler standard. So you have different types, which are different message types on the network, but by far the most common type is a type 1 message. That's what all the Twitter clients are using. And in a type 1 message, it's literally a JSON blob with 7 fields. You have like the user ID, you have, a couple other pieces of metadata and the payload, and then you have a signature. And that's it. And so, you do have a standard that most of these relays sort of engage in for like, okay, this is like the type of message format we want to see. Although, you will eventually see different subnets of the network that, maybe some specialize in different types. Like for example, I'm very bullish in the future. You think about what is assigned message, where you can build Twitter, you could build, the Substack clones and that sort of stuff are coming now, longer form text. You can also build marketplaces with this. You can just have signed bids and signed asks. And so there'll be certain sort of relays, I imagine, that specialize more in some of those data place feeds, but that's very interesting too. I think the other thing maybe that I would just hit on that's a really big point here. One of the reasons I'm so bullish on Nostr really popping, I think, in the next 18 months is, to DK's point, every message is signed, and that's super important. And I think particularly, in sort of the Create world and just the LLM world more generally, the amount of software, the amount of writing, the amount of information it's already like, we're already drowning in information. It's a huge problem. And it's going to be like at least 10x worse in the next year or two, I imagine, right? Like, as the amount of new content comes out, I dread what, the election time is going to be like with like, who knows how many deep fake videos and texts and blah, blah, blah. And so when I look to that world, Nostr is the only corner of the internet I'm aware of where every message is signed with a private key. And so that increasingly is the only kind of corner of the web that I'm trusting. Yes, I could trust a platform and actually do, happen to like the way Twitter is going. But even then, Elon, if for whatever reason he's not around tomorrow, or anyone, any of these centralized platforms, you could get hacked or whatever. And like all of a sudden, a world leader, how do I know they actually said that? And it wasn't just, a hack at the site. So I think that the fact the message format is specified, it's very simple, and it's signed is really key.
Yeah, super fascinating. I mean, I think everyone's been talking about this as like the core like crypto use case in a world of AI fakes and everything else, of signed messages and veracity and being able to trust like that something was actually somebody. It's super interesting. I actually like want to go build a Nostr client. I'm curious to see if I can generate it on Create today. What does it take to talk to a relay as a client?
So you have to just look at there's a Nostr, a GitHub that explains fiatjaf is the creator of the protocol, and he has I think fiatjaf/Nostr on GitHub, and it just defines sort of the protocol for this kind one message. That's kind of the signed message and how to interact with relays. It uses WebSockets, so WSS : is the underlying protocol for clients to connect with relays. But I'm sure you could just like pull down code from like Primal or Damus or whatever, and you would very easily see all the places that it's connecting. It's using WebSockets to connect to these relays. You could find all that code and make like an atomic block of that can be reused by anybody who wants to build anything in Nostr. Key generation. So if you're like new, you don't yet have a key, you have to sort of be able to generate a key. But like Max said, it's fairly straightforward. I'm sure that you could copy a code block and sort of create an atomic block, building block for people to build other Nostr apps on Create.
And I actually tried earlier today. Again,
we don't support WebSockets, so that might be one thing that might be a little tricky. That if you were trying to build an app, but you built this key signing part, right? Yeah.
Well, yeah. So that was just like a simple function to take. Like, there's different formats. There's like the INPUB format and the hexadecimal format for these keys or whatever. What I was trying to get to work today, I didn't put as much time into. This is kind of the dream experience that I want to get to. Is I have yet to fine tune a model, and I'm incredibly bullish on sort of Google web search and or some kind of LLM trained on Nostr data. And the reason is, like I was just saying, I think that's the only kind of trustworthy section of the web. And if it completely goes on an exponential, like I think it will in the next year or two, then I think there's really interesting questions around evolving models in that section of the web. Anyway, so I was asking Create, to create some of that code for me to be able to basically suck down data from the Primal relay, the Damus relay, and the Nostr.band relay, and then put it in a format where I could fine tune the model, fine tune the most recent Llama model. And so I'm still super early in that, but I think it wrote a lot of the code out for me. So I'd have to go back and see that. But I didn't even have to look anything up.
That's cool.
I think there's
That's
also
awesome.
a caching service that that Primal has open sourced. So I think
that's right.
I don't know if that requires WebSockets, or they may have. I haven't looked at it, but it wouldn't surprise me if like they have a different protocol that they've developed to sort of help their client interact with that cache. So if Create doesn't support WebSockets today, maybe it could still interface with Nostr via like one of the caches or something.
Yeah, Primal open sourced all their caching stuff. I actually don't think you need WebSockets for that.
It's awesome.
Yeah. Another thing to consider just around like thinking through the architecture structure of Nostr is because the client and the data stores are separated, it actually gives you the ability, and people haven't explored this a lot yet, but it gives you the ability to like plug in different algorithms. And so I think a lot of the Nostr world, has like a severe kind of phobia of algorithms. And I think that's just because we've never seen algorithms that are not controlled by a corporation that is sort of in service of the corporation's needs. And so, you look at Twitter, it's like, okay, like the tweets that they show are to try to get more impressions because they're more divisive, or they spark an emotion, or sometimes anger in somebody. And I think when you have an algorithm that's in service of a platform that's trying to serve more ads, then you get algorithms that are aimed at that platform's goals. And we've never really seen like social media algorithms that are designed for my goals. Like, what if one of my goals is I want to come away having learned something, or I want to come away feeling happier from seeing inspirational messages or whatever. Like those, we could all imagine how you would write such an algorithm, but we can't plug it into Twitter.
Yep.
Twitter is going to run for its own purpose. But we can plug in algorithms that are transparent, open source, and in service of our needs and goals. And if they divert from our goals, we could take them out and plug in new ones that are consistent with our goals. So the reason I mentioned that too, I think it's like an important piece in the kind of, thinking through social media clients and stuff. But you also mentioned sort of discoverability of Create. And one could imagine, far forward future where Create has all of the infrastructure for helping kind of build the apps and get them deployed, but then the discoverability maybe should be pluggable in a similar way where you could say, actually, show me all the noob stuff instead, because, I just know that I'm a noob and I don't really know what I'm doing here. So show me the noob stuff. And then actually I feel like I've graduated enough to like, I actually want to only work on projects where I can contribute code. So I maybe want like a different type of discoverability algorithm. And so in a sense, by making those things pluggable, transparent, open source, you reshape the ability, you sort of reshape the goals of what kinds of algorithms do get built, which leads to a huge flourishing of all kinds of ideas that have never been tried because somebody's not a product manager at Twitter.
Yeah, it's super cool. I mean, you even see this Twitter. I also like the direction Elon's going with it, but like, it's so funny. Like, even as they publish the algorithm open source the last like 12 months, you've just seen prioritization of images, which is great. But now my Twitter feed kind of looks like an Instagram feed, and it's so funny how quickly that changes like behavior on the platform versus like the choice of algorithm basically determines the medium you're going to see. And so it would be cool to be pluggable. I guess one question for both of y'all. Sorry, Max, I cut you off.
No. Well, so one last thing I want to throw in here is just as we're sort of riffing on ideas, I think there's one other really powerful early toehold for Create to potentially explore. And, we mentioned a bit, I guess, when we were chatting before, and I hope they still do this, but, I have been wanting for Replit for years to take some of the sort of, I guess, behaviors that they've already encouraged and open them up. So they have something that I love, which is bounties, right? So the ability for someone to get paid to create something. I think that's awesome. But today they use kind of their own internal currency. I'm very bullish on something called Nostr Wallet Connect, which is an easy way for two different parties to pay each other and a site to orchestrate the payment between those two different parties in a way that they never have to touch either of the payment rails. Now, as we mentioned, most of the early Nostr community comes from the Bitcoin community. So Bitcoin and Lightning payments are very, very popular there. But with Nostr Wallet Connect, you can also plug in stuff like eCash, which is getting really big in the Bitcoin world as well. So one interesting thing that I've thought a lot about is, I was doing some research on Replit a year or so ago, and I was just flabbergasted to see that, 80% of the user base is outside the United States, or at least it was at the time. And like over half was under the age of 18, which is fascinating to me. That's interesting because it's all these kids that have a whole lot of time, and it's kids that probably have limited access to bank accounts if they're growing up in India or wherever. And so I think there's this kind of like, to your point, we're saying, yes, there's always the business opportunity to sell enterprise, and that's awesome. But I think there's this kind of like huge pie in the sky opportunity that Repl and other people are just leaving on the table, which is how do you get, the hundreds of millions of kids in India, Nigeria, Mexico, Brazil paid in a way that Stripe can't today, either for regulatory reasons or because they're under the age of 18 or even 13, where you can't open an account, even with your parents. And, one thing that's super interesting about Nostr is because we've kind of already integrated a lot of those Bitcoin Lightning payments, people are super used, they're very accustomed to paying for things. And so coming back to an idea that I've had, I have actually probably have dozens of ideas for apps I would love to build on Nostr. And I hope to, have the time to sit down and play with something like Create and get good enough to start building them myself. And I probably will. But I would gladly put up at least hundreds of dollars, maybe more, towards bounties to see some of this stuff get built right now, today. Like if I could do this today, I would publish this today. And if you did something like Nostr Wallet Connect, you wouldn't even have to touch any of the money. There's no money transmission because you never touch anything. You're just kind of coordinating like a Plaid or a Visa or a MasterCard. And I mean, I'll tell you right now. So a couple of things I mentioned, I want to see someone, one, take any of these clients and experiment with adding in, tons of different algorithms. So maybe some that are based on who's zapped the most, some that are based on, who follows, like all kinds of different experiments with algorithms. Two, open sourcing or training and fine tuning some of these open source LLMs and other models on Nostr data. Boom. I would love to see more people playing with that. Three, I've been thinking about ideas around an app, like very simple app, or even like a function that I would love to see where it's like, okay, because we have this open web of trust, I want to see someone build, just a simple app that recommends, here are 5 people that you would never find normally that you should follow because they're interesting and you guys would totally jive. I would love to see someone rebuild. What was that site? I know it turned into kind of like just like dick pic psych or whatever, but like, what was it? Chat roulette, something like chat roulette, but like where I'm not going to see someone flashing their junk at me, but I'm actually going to meet someone really cool from a different part of the world. 4, couch surfing. I'd love to see someone build that right now for Nostr and Bitcoin people on there. Anyways, you get the point. I could keep going with literally dozens of these, and I would pay to have a lot of these apps built today. So I think there's something really magical, not only with the open data source and remixability, but because people are already comfortable with payments. And I think the magic number is if you can get someone young in an emerging market country paid $1,000 a month, you win.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, it is a lot of infrastructure. Like I am like to like rebuild yourself, even as like a quote unquote Web2 company, right? That's like if we imagine we did want to launch like the ability for somebody to like get paid out on Create for their time live, and so it is interesting watching these alternative like payment rails start to develop and realizing like actually these might actually be at maturity. We do get a fair number of requests to pay even the Create Pro subscription in Bitcoin. And I think, as you mentioned, I think it's because a lot of Create users are outside of the US and for whatever reason, like don't have traditional credit cards or just don't. And actually, a lot of our users are actually anonymous. And so like there is like a little element to this where, but I was looking into like what's the fastest way for us to support accepting like Bitcoin and what's the fastest way to add this to the site. And it's still just so like opaque, like and hard, even if as a business that would want to do it. And so, yeah, it'll be interesting. I'd be interested in thinking about as we like start to develop these bounties, like how easy is it to kind of stick this into the site and make it a native way to get paid out for your time on Create.
We can help you with that.
Yeah, I mean, please do. It'd be super interesting. I like. It is our first goal is like let's get as many builders as possible on here, and then we can maybe start to work on connecting the builders, but. Without lots of builders, like the ideal experience in my mind is like you're building and then like you're stuck and then you say like, oh well, like who else is building like right now that's like better than me. And then to your point on trust, like we also need to start building profiles into great. Like one naive question for you guys, like what would stop us, because I agree with your point, like all of our data today is in our Postgres database, including all of the generations that like anybody like does, and that we run and host that app. And I guess we know how to like run this code, but other clients could, in theory, run this code as well. And so I'm curious, like, what would stop us from like posting all of the data and Create, in addition to like a Nostr, like at least all the free data that people are creating, like at least also to like a Nostr relay, so that people could go and then go make I don't know, they could either like make their own clients that host and run other like Create apps. Is it just like the size of the messages, and actually like those messages would be pretty massive as you start to think about like apps and code? Or is it, the cost of actually hosting the data, and actually the economic incentive needs to be there so that people actually want to retrieve this data? Like, how do you guys think about it?
Yeah, it's a good question. A lot of the relays, like everything's kind of voluntary today, and there's not like really strong business models around how Nostr works. It's more, it's people who believe that this is a great way that the web should be structured, but the details of how money should be made and transmit and flow is like very underexplored, sort of early. So I'd say like the relay operators for the most part are doing it as a community good, as a kind of community service. And there's some, bandwidth and storage costs that they incur. And they, people tried like paid relays, and sometimes those get some uptake, but I would say like largely that's not like the major trend. Most people are using free relays. So like, what's to stop you from having Create data hosted by relays? Like, I think probably nothing would stop you on day one, but I would be a little cautious about overloading relays with data that is unlikely to be used, just because, it's kind of like people are doing this as volunteers and they're incurring the costs, or if you're like more judicious about like what kinds of data you'd want to push into Nostr because there's like a really good use case for it. I think that kind of thing could get people excited and wanting to support it more. Or if you really want to kind of make it more Nostr compatible, but you actually are willing to host the resource yourself, you could spin up your own relay, push all of the data to your own relay because you're willing to host it anyway. Sign it with your own private keys, right, or as a Create private key. And so all the messages kind of live and are available to everybody, but they're verified as coming from Create. But it's on a relay, and if other relays want to pick it up, they can. And if they don't want to, they don't have to. So it kind of feels like it's a nice way to maybe balance the fact that there's not really a business model to relay running yet. But I think in the long run, there probably will be. Like, it seems like there's real cost to it. I think people will pay for the kind of quality and experience and apps that they can get on Nostr. And just as more and more apps get built, I think there's just going to be more appetite to pay for those things. So.
Yeah, I would second DK's thought. Like, if you were willing to run your own relay, even as an experiment, that would be a really cool experiment. And then you could also kind of get a sense of what people want the data for, and like if they're going to use it for remixes. Because it's all open source, there are tons of different relay implementations, including Ellen Bits, I think, and probably other people do as well. But Ellen Bits has certain relays where you can even, not that you would want to do this, but you could charge like per kilobyte of write or read. So sats per kilobyte of write or read. So there are some interesting things you'd experiment with there. And kind of getting back to my other point, which could be of interest to you, is I personally am very much of the belief someone's going to build a massive business around search and discovery on Nostr, and maybe software, becomes a part of that. But you kind of bring up this question yourself. Everyone posts all of their data, to Nostr, all of a sudden it just gets super clogged. And again, we're back with the same problem, which is how do we surface? Like, great, we have all the data in the world. It's free. It's amazing. I have, 24 hours in a day and so much energy and attention. How do we find that? And I still think that's kind of where the magic and the business opportunity lies.
Yeah. Well, like, distribution's undefeated. It's so interesting thinking about this. Like, when we think about, like, we're doing web apps right now, and it's like, well, like, what other types of like runtimes do people want to build apps for, right? And part of our like priority, or one idea we've had is like, oh, should we like make it really easy to make Discord apps, like Discord apps?
Yeah.
And that's mainly because like our creators would like to make Discord apps, and
totally.
why? Because like, Discord has like a lot of like distribution communities where like, if you can make an app, day one, you'll get at least your 10 friends in your like sole Discord like server to like use it, And so it's interesting thinking about like, and for us as like a tool where we want to help people making apps on Create, adding another distribution channel where it's like, you don't like the way we're sorting the feed or the way we're discovering like our pieces of open source software, like why not enable like, someone else to resort it? It only makes it more valuable for us, and I guess you have to compete in some ways on the merits of being the best client for that data, or being the best like creator of that data, which is in line with like the same bet we're making today. We're going to build an infinite canvas and like a better editor, and it's going to take some investment, and we're going to trust that like you're going to like our editor more than you're going to like other people's editor. And so you're going to pay us and not others. But it's an interesting, especially as all this stuff goes to like zero marginal cost. It's interesting thinking about like, a lot of the old assumptions of like, oh no, we got to lock down and protect like this app and like this like unique thing start to change, and how people will start to build value or business models on top of the data, I think is really, really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the big trend here, and I know you're already aware, but I think the idea that we now have an internet native currency and money means that more and more, I think we're going to see, whether it's the apps or the infrastructure or users paying and being easy to pay and making kind of the business model of the future is kind of direct pay from like the whole globe to anybody who's creating value on the internet. And it's not just, sign up for a website, swipe a credit card and a Stripe thing, but it's, much more kind of a smaller scale payments from a lot more people that are going to help people build all kinds of new businesses. And when you actually sit there and you're able to observe the money flow, you actually get a lot of signal about quality. Like, oh, a lot of people are paying for this app. That actually means this is a really good app. So we want to like help it get more people who want to use such a thing. So I think, money's in a sense like the ultimate scarcity is like the way to, attention and money are like the scarce things, right? So if you see people putting money behind something and putting attention behind something, it actually helps provide a really nice signal about which apps people are finding the most value from and what they want to use and who else might like to use such an app.
And the other thing that's super interesting there is with the Lightning Network in particular, this is because of the way the Lightning Network works. I know we touched on this a bit when we chatted last week, but all blockchains, including Bitcoin, they have to get consensus, and consensus is obviously very expensive to achieve. Just from like a physics standpoint, you have to have all these different databases having one view of the world. And so one of our core bets has been that you only really want to pay that expense for the core thing, which is money. And Bitcoin has fought many bloody battles over the block size, all these different things to do that. But in terms of the actual payments itself, just like the rest of reality, just like the internet itself, it scales in layers, just like TCP, IP, all the way up to HTTP and SMTP, et cetera. And so with the Lightning Network, what's beautiful about it is it's not a consensus network. It's a peer-to-peer, it's Tor. It's literally incentivized Tor. It's onion routed messages with payments included.
Yeah, and settlements like delayed, basically.
Well, the beautiful thing is that you can actually get instant settlement. And so to the best of my knowledge, it's the only payment network on the planet today where you can have infinite settlement of essentially any size. And, you can denominate that in dollars or denominate whatever you want. You don't even have to, people don't even have to know Bitcoin's getting used. Obviously, Bitcoin has, good distribution, good brand, et cetera. But if someone wants to do it in dollars or rupees or pesos or whatever, it doesn't matter. The point is that instant settlement of any size opens up radically new opportunities and business models. So like in the case of Stacker News, DK is talking about that value signal, which I also think is going to be extremely important for the new search engines or Google of the future. Because again, that Bitcoin is scarce, right? And now that you have an open social graph of who's zapping who, even if it's just tips, the tips alone are nice. And that's great, but that signal is super important. But on Stacker News, if I like an article, I can click once and tap 21 sats or 100 sats, which are tiny units of Bitcoin, or 1,000. So that's on the order of a penny or less of value. And you just straight up can't do that today in the existing world. You can also, because it's programmable, have like programmable payments. So imagine as an idea, this is something that I've also been thinking a lot about in open source software. It's been really tough for people to monetize stuff like packages, right? And imagine if I, am remixing a piece of software and I use 100 different open source components or packages in there to do that. And imagine if each of those packages has an npub or a lightning address, and a lightning address can be attached to an npub with it. All of a sudden, if someone either pays for my service or tips my service, I can programmatically, literally at the speed of light, send that payment to me and then prism it out to 100 different people or creators at once, which is a crazy fucking idea.
Yeah. No, it's so funny. It's funny as we're talking about this. Back when we first started Create back in 2021, and we had the code gen system that would generate some pieces of code, and then we'd also have a developer marketplace where people would customize the code for our customers. And we had like 10 startup customers that were like building projects on Create, using this network we'd created. Like we thought about like, man, there's this network, and the best way we can get implementations integrated together would be if developers could contribute them back. And part of our thought process and like, why has open source not worked? It's like, because like, that value signal has not actually come all the way. So in the first version of Create, we're playing with a lot of these ideas like, well, what if we pull in the money, send it to developers in proportion to what you actually integrate in that first portion of Create? I think we have like a very similar potential here as we get this working and running. We've yet to people pay for software made on Create. But once you have like, okay, somebody's actually like paying for like buying this software and not just buying a course off platform, but they're paying this platform. What's the most efficient way to then, like pay out and deliver value to everybody who contributed to the chain? And so
Exactly.
maybe we actually owned the chain. Like maybe we're a traditional old school company and we, our integration of like making sure that the code runs and making sure that DK made a component for the header and you made a component for like the algorithm that talks to the Nostr client and whatever it is. But we know how all that stuff got forked and then bundled into a product that then got sold, that then got remixed itself. And like, what is a really simple way to do like the YouTube rights algorithm essentially of like who should actually be paid for this? So it's interesting thinking about like, it's just interesting infrastructure that, a lot of like common, you can even make a closed platform like ours a lot more valuable, even separated from like the underlying like code and clients. So yeah.
Well, one question for you, Dhruv. I know we've thrown a lot at you on this Nostr section. I know the purple pill has been heavy there. What you mentioned, 20 minutes ago or whatever, that you were interested in. Oh, I'd like to build a Nostr app, or whatever. Out of everything we've said to you, if you were to try and build a Nostr app, like what do you think would be the most fun or interesting thing that you'd be interested to build?
Well, the most fun thing, honestly, and I suspect it'd be pretty easy, would be just like, can I stick up a way to pay me in Nostr on Create? And the reason I say this is like, I've actually started to see some users create a simple prototype or create a simple like of some service they want to launch, and then they like will also launch and embed like donate here Stripe link. And I'm sure like we'll build auth and we'll build Stripe payments, but the traditional way we build auth and Stripe payments is we do auth with like user password and we do Stripe as like the payment rails. And so I guess there's like a question in my mind, which is like, after I come from here, like how fast can I actually get an app where someone can log in with Nostr and it's like secure, and they can then quickly pay me for whatever my app or service happens to be. So that's like number one that I'm probably going to go play with. And then the second is just like, assuming there's a relay with a ton of really interesting data, I need to look a little bit more into like how you actually talk to a relay. But just how fast is it to build like a client? Like I know DK, you mentioned like suck it all in. Today we haven't built this like import flow of like, oh, okay, I can just point it at a GitHub URL. But what's like the simplest relay explorer I can build as a client app on Create? And once who am very familiar with Create and how to make a function that talks to this relay, like figure that out, then I think that I'll maybe send it to you guys as like just a block that anyone can then remix and reuse as like a
That's
piece
awesome.
that makes it maybe a little bit easier than developing a client typically is. So
yeah, that's awesome. Well, I want to be mindful of time because I know we're already a bit over the time we'd allocated for today. I know we can probably go on for hours. We got so many common themes to touch on, but I mean, I love the work that you're doing, Dhruv. So I'm like
Likewise.
a big fan of this whole of your process and your thinking and kind of what you're building. And I think we're very excited about Nostr, as you can tell. So like, if there's ever opportunities, whether how to think about engaging the Nostr community with the Create community or vice versa, definitely reach out to us as a resource and thought partner.
Well, I'd say I'm coming on the podcast, but really it's a really fun team here in SF. Maxie met them that are doing all the hard work of actually pushing and making this pushing this forward. We're small. We're in SF. If anyone wants to come hang and talk about these ideas or use the product, and feel free to join our Discord and get some ideas. I mean, I can go make Nostr clients, but I bet you there's people in the Nostr community who can figure out how to hack Create to be useful from a Nostr perspective. So that'd be cool. And
people go find you on Create.xyz, right? Is the URL?
That's right. Create.xyz is the first kind of building in public where the guarantee the product will evolve over the next couple of months, but that's where it's at. You can also follow us at Twitter at create_xyz. And our Discord is it's linked from the app. But if there's Nostr super fans who are also like builders and want to play with a natural language way to build, check us out and let me know how we can make it even better for Nostr fans.
And if people want to get in touch with you personally, should they hit you on Twitter, DM, email, Discord? What's best?
Yeah, I'm active on Twitter. My Twitter handle is DhruvTruth.
Good name.
And I know it's a Twitter handle you make when you're little that sticks with you forever. And then I also just feel free to email me. I'm Dhruv at Create, THRUV, at Create.xyz. And thanks, TK. Honestly, a few 6 months ago, I was reading your article on, the cost of software going to zero marginal cost and what that does to distribution and what that does to remixability. And it was so funny because Marcus and I, my co-founder, felt like we were sitting in a room being like, this is all going to change. And I think you put to words in like such a great way a lot of the things we talk about. So if anyone's also interested in working on this stuff and shifting the direction of the company, we're of course hiring and scaling it up, and the team's fired up that we're starting to see the early signs of this happen. And so thanks for jamming with us.
I'll say that their office is really cool too. I really liked it a lot.
I haven't been to the office yet. How many people are on the team today?
We just hired our 5th engineer, so we are slowly scaling. We're 4 before that. 5th is joined. We're looking at someone to focus on community growth, joining the team as well, and have a few engineers who are talking to us as well. So the team's starting to get bigger from the initial 4.
That's great. Congrats. So let's do another one in a little bit, and we'll catch up and hear how Create's going and share what we're learning.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks for coming on, Dhruv. This
Thanks
is
for
great.
coming.
Thanks, guys.